Hi, welcome to Bull Squash, and today we have another episode. So, if you remember from my last one, I actually cut off my 10th opinion, sort of related to what I had been discussing about the refereeing in the event. The reason why I had done that was because that same week there was an incident in the NHL related to a referee where, if you wanted the details, I'll add a link, but basically, this referee, Tim Peel, who's right at the end of his career, he's actually retiring April 24th, basically had a comment that was caught on a hot mic. So either a mic he was wearing or it might have been a mic that was at the bench. It was actually broadcast, not to his knowledge, that he was planning on giving a penalty to the Nashville Predators, who were playing the Detroit Red Wings, at the beginning of the period. And he did that with pre-intent. So basically what happened was it just exploded in the last week in the sports news cycles, where basically people were saying, well, what the heck's going on? This is what's a phenomenon called game management, which involves doing make-up calls. So if you miss a call early, you might make it up to another team later. It could also be an even up call, evening up meaning that you want equal amounts of penalties between both teams in a game. So there was a bunch of outrage basically over the incident, just saying from fans saying, what's going on? Why aren't referees referring to the rule book, which a reasonable person would think is happening. But one of the interesting things that came out of that, and there's a variety of ways I can get into this and relate it back to squash, but the way I'm going to look at it is when they did a bunch of interviews with people, within the game, so ex-players, current players, coaches, a couple of GMs, and obviously color commentary folk from the various networks. Basically, the general consensus I was seeing, and it differs from person to person, so I'm not trying to say specifically any given person would have said that, but from what I was reading and what I was watching was the commentators actually don't mind a certain level of interaction between refs and players, where a ref would actually make calls based on what you could call the flow of the game. If the game is nitty gritty, lots of bad blood, potential for fights. So say a game between two rivals, you might expect a little bit more dangerous play, more hits. So the referee might decide to enforce more penalties than he normally would in any average game. Likewise, if there's within the game lots of good flow, the puck's moving, players seem to be doing a decent job of avoiding any major interference, the referee may decide not to make as many calls and quote unquote put away the whistle. So it's a bit more to referee's discretion. And again, you might think, well, that's wrong and the referee should be calling every penalty. But again, a lot of the consensus was also on they don't want what's called a parade to the penalty box. Penalties in hockey, and again, I might be talking to the wrong audience here, but you'll have to kind of bear with me. But penalties in hockey cost time because it's a 2-minute power play. So basically it means that one player is off the ice from the penalized team for a given 2 minutes. And that's where you can, if you have too many penalties, people would argue that the game just evolves into these power play situations, which arguably could be considered bad watching. I would not necessarily agree with that, but that was, again, the message I was hearing. So anyway, how does this relate back to squash? Well, one of the areas where I think squash lacks a little bit is a bit of the communication issue with players. Now, a lot of this is not necessarily the ref's fault. It's not necessarily the player's fault, but I definitely think that there are some issues that need to be resolved. So, kind of how does this work? Like squash and hockey are both games where you have lots of interference. They're both fast-paced. referees are going to miss a lot of things, but there's also some very important differences as well. So a couple of the major ones is, we talked about the hot mic and the referee and in the hockey game getting caught. Well, in squash, in specifically professional squash, the ref is always on the hot mic. They're surrounded by people in a crowd. It's one of the only sports, if not the only sport I can think of, where the officiator, the umpire, judge, whatever you call it, is within the audience. So basically, every word that the ref says gets not only has to be communicated to the player, but ultimately gets communicated to everybody. Just a bit of background: I actually did refereeing courses and a couple seminars. I actually got my level 1, or basically introductory refereeing license, or however you call it, several years back. And one of the lessons I learned at that point was one of the jobs of a ref is actually having that relationship with fans, calling the score, letting the not just players, but letting the audience know when a ball's not up or down, and so on and so forth. So it basically allows the audience to actually understand what's happening in the game a bit more. So that relationship is a little bit more, it's a little more stark in squash than it is in hockey. In hockey, the ref will call penalties at center ice, but for the most part, the communication there is mostly just within the confines of player ref or coach ref. The other major difference is I find is the most obvious one actually being that in hockey, penalties are not reviewable. In squash, they are. So you can have any given non-call, so a no-let or a call, a stroke in essence, reviewed, and it's at the player's discretion or even at the referee's discretion. Sometimes they don't. Again, the game's very fast. They don't necessarily always have the opportunity to had a good enough appreciation for a given situation, so they'll go to the video ref. So one thing that that does do is it actually allows for more transparency in squash. Now, transparency isn't always the best thing, because the other half of it is with the referee's line of thinking. It's actually very difficult to be consistent. Now, this is something I'd probably get into in another video, but I do find that because squash's rules are very interpretive, they're based on the referee's line of thinking. Did interference happen? Did the player make every effort to get to the ball? Did the interfering player make every effort to get out of the way? Kind of that line. I know it's a bit more complicated than that, but just getting into that level, you can basically see that it's very there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more experience needed for a ref to actually understand the different situations and understanding when we have lets and no lets. Whereas in hockey, the way it's supposed to be according to the rule book, you have specific situations for slashing, for cross-checking, for tripping, and they'll actually break down what each of those situations are in text. Now, squash, for as far as I know, and I tried to find this for a couple different rulings, specifically blocking, they don't really have any sort of text saying this is what constitutes a block, this is what constitutes, say, a trip, front court interference, swing interference. There isn't a lot that's very specific to it. Now, I know that both squash and hockey, they try to use video examples with refs and players to make them understand this is kind of what that situation looks like and how to avoid getting no lets or strokes in those positions. But I find that, at least with hockey, you have a narrative. You have something you can hang your hat on to say, oh, okay, yeah, like this wording does make sense with this situation. That doesn't exist in squash. So squash has a lot of interpretation. And I find, because, again, going to the transparency, yes, everyone in a stadium, when you're having a professional squash match, has to hear the same explanation. But I actually, and again, coming back, hearing what a lot of those ex-players specifically were talking about, that relationship between the player and the ref, I actually wonder at times, and what I'm going to make a proposal, but I actually think that the referee might be better off not necessarily broadcasting everything they're saying to the audience. Because the problem is that to the audience, they have to be very political. They have to be very consistent with what they've said before. But they also have to be expedient and not cause time delays, which can disrupt the flow of the match. I think it would be better in some cases where the ref can just talk one-on-one with the player, even in the middle of a match or in the middle of a game, and just say, hey, you know what? This is what I like to see from you. And then to the other, and you can have a discussion with both players and say, you know, if you're going to, you know, get in the way here, if you're not clearing properly at this position, then I'm going to have to start giving strokes, but I don't want to do that yet. That's something, if you said that with an audience, it's tough, right? Because an audience might think, well, why didn't you just give the stroke right away? Or why didn't you, just enforce the rule to begin with? But the thing is, again, as a ref, you still want to control the flow of the game to some extent. You want to help the players. You want to work with the players. But it's very difficult when you have, you know, up to, it could be 1,000 people around you. I don't know if they've actually had matches with 1,000 people, but hey, we can always wish. But you have several people around you, and I don't say that they're judging you, but that's what you feel as a ref. It's a human emotion when you're in that kind of crowd. It's really difficult to block out those emotions of fear and, you know, disappointing the audience. Hockey, it's a little bit better because, you know, hot mic aside, you get to just have a one-on-one conversation. It's just between you and the player, and it allows you to be a bit more colloquial and explain things probably in a way that your average fan might not always understand. So basically, you know, you get more transparency with squash, but it actually might lead to less consistency. So one of the areas where I think that you can actually get a huge improvement, I would argue a huge improvement with the reffing situation in squash right now, is if you just actually move the ref from the stands to the front of the court. Kind of similar to how, you know, if you're in beer league or, you know, local leagues, whatever, mostly the refs are right in front of the court. I would love to see that with squash. I actually don't know why right now we have the ref in the audience, other than potentially, I think the only con to that would be they have more of an angle. So given a situation where a player A might be blocking the ball, so say on a drop shot, you're not necessarily sure if it's a tin, but you can't, you know, if you're right at ground level with the players, you might get it blocked out. But then that's what the video ref is for. And I'm specifically talking about, you know, high level PSA, like platinum level events where you're actually getting multiple camera angles. This doesn't work at anywhere where you don't have the video refereeing system. But as long as you have a video referee, the main ref can actually consult with the video ref and be able to tell, you know, hey, I didn't see this. Can you tell me, do you think that tin was up or that ball was up or down? And that consultation can happen, and now you have multiple angles. So it actually introduces another angle that the videos don't really have right now, which is front on at ground level with the court. You do have them on the sides, but you don't have it actually in the middle. So this would improve the game in a few different ways that I don't know if it's been discussed. I'm sure that at the high level within PSA they've talked about this before, but I wonder if it's been discussed in recent years where we've gone back to one referee system with the video ref. So I actually think if you're that close, it makes out of courts, and most tins, as long as the player's not blocking the view, it makes most tins way easier to see. So it adds consistency there. It also lets you see a little bit more of the nuance. So when you're far away, it can be difficult to see if, say, a player's sticking out their leg a little bit more, or if a player's just anchoring back to the tee in a straight line rather than making a J movement back. And so you actually can get that little bit of extra nuance to any sort of interference calls. The other thing that allows for is, again, I said this before, is just another angle that isn't within currently what PSA does with their cameras. Again, you have ground level cameras on the side walls, but you don't have anything straight on down the middle. The other one, and this goes back to what I was saying with, with that discussion with the players, is now you can have those, quote unquote, private conversations with the player where a player can just step off court. The referee can stand up, basically say, hey, he's right here, right in front of you. You can do this conversation quick and say, hey, buddy, I want you to play the ball here. I didn't give you I didn't give you a stroke for, a no-let. I guess in that situation it would be a no-let. But I didn't give you a no-let here because, I'm giving you a bit of the benefit of the doubt. But next time I want you to do this kind of, see if you can, try to get around your opponent more. Speak a little bit more specifically so as not to confuse the audience, but you can work with the player a little bit more without, again, getting all that judgment. And it takes out a lot of the human emotion. The referee's going to be right at the front. The audience is behind him. All the ref sees are the players. And that's great. That's, it allows you to focus so much more easily. I've reffed with, 100 people around me before in stands, and it can be very stressful because all of a sudden someone goes, oh, bad call, and the guy's like literally next to you. And you get a bunch of groans. And again, human emotion, you're going to feel that. And you're going to react to that. And you may not react properly. You may play to the crowd a little bit, hear those groans, and next time you might not make the call that you would have in the past. And that's where consistency needs to come into play. You want to make the same call at the beginning of the match that you do at the end of the match. And right now, I don't think we have that. I barely think in squash we have consistency within a game, because at the beginning of the game certain calls can be made that once you're at 9-all, 10-all into tiebreak that don't get made, and obviously then it just devolves throughout the match. It goes away between tournaments, between matches within a tournament. There is just no consistency, and it's very difficult to achieve consistency with the way things are. The referees do not have the tools. So this was kind of just my perspective of a potential improvement in squash. I'm not saying this is, the silver bullet for squash to, basically achieve perfect consistency. You will never really achieve perfect consistency. And with the NHL example, you see that even though they have a rule book and they have detailed rules, players like it when sometimes you go away from that and you don't call every little nitty-gritty slash to the feet, or, well, hopefully not you do to the hands. That's pretty severe. But, even then it can be, again, nuanced, but not so severe that you don't want to disrupt the flow of the game. And I think in both the NHL and in PSA, the referees are trying to achieve good flow to games. So that was kind of my opinion. I'm not sure what anyone else thinks. I would love to hear more comments, but I think this is just a way of getting a different opinion, different viewpoint out there. And I really enjoy talking about refereeing. I'm going to do more videos about other aspects, maybe going into more codification of the rules, similar to what the NHL has, but, giving another tool to refs. But anyway, that'll be for another video. I'm really glad that you joined me here tonight. It's been great. These first 3 videos have actually been, in my mind, pretty successful just because I've gone and made them. For this one, I'm adding a few more graphics, trying to work with my video editor a bit more just to understand and add a few more visualizations, such as situations where you might get that inconsistencies. But for the player analysis, I'm hoping to add within fair use, some video from PSA, but we'll see how it works out. But anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and thanks. Have a good night.